Let's go back to ancient Greece, around 2,300 years ago. Zenon of Cyprus, a wealthy merchant, was traveling one day with his ship and its cargo. However, the sea was far from calm that day, and ultimately, Zenon's ship sank, and all his possessions were lost to the depths of the ocean. From being wealthy, Zenon quickly became impoverished. This unfortunate event drove him to contemplate and research life. He read various books, conversed with some philosophers around him, and eventually decided to develop his own philosophical teachings. He established Stoicism and began to spread this philosophy. This philosophy did not remain confined to ancient Greece, but spread to ancient Rome and garnered interest from various people, including philosophers like Epictetus and Seneca, and even Emperor Marcus Aurelius. In this video, I will discuss Stoic philosophy and the views of its representatives. The fundamental principle of Stoicism is that a person should live in accordance with nature. Stoic philosophers use this principle as their starting point. Here, nature should be understood not just as wild nature or human nature, but as a universal, cosmic concept. Considering that Stoics have a pantheistic understanding of God, meaning that God is present everywhere in nature and thus nature is considered sacred and divine, we can understand that Stoic philosophers view nature as the highest value. They speak of nature as a self-sufficient, creative reason that organizes the universe, which can be equated with their concept of God. Given that the highest value in Stoicism is nature and living in accordance with nature is the foundation of this philosophy, let's use this foundation as our starting point and proceed. When we consider humanity within this context, it becomes evident that our distinguishing feature is the capacity for reason. This reason is a gift from nature, and using it is what nature expects from us. Thus, living in accordance with nature also means living in accordance with reason. Let's conduct a thought experiment. Imagine two types of worlds. In one, people exhibit all the characteristics we define as good, fair, knowledgeable, rational, and not committing crimes. Let's call this the virtuous world. The other world is the opposite, a chaotic world filled with crimes. Let's call this the vicious world. Which world would be preferable for most people? Especially for someone following Stoic philosophy, the virtuous world would be the more rational choice. Since Stoicism is based on living according to nature and the highest values in Stoicism, nature, creative reason, order, and goodness, are inherent in the virtuous world, a Stoic would place the goal of achieving a virtuous world and being a virtuous person at the center of their life. Therefore, Stoicism, starting from living according to nature, leads us to living in accordance with reason, and, from there, to a virtuous life. In Stoicism, the concept of virtue is of significant importance. Therefore, in the next section, we will explore virtue in detail. Stoics define virtue through four main aspects: wisdom, temperance, justice, and courage. These concepts are interrelated, and a person who embodies all four is considered virtuous. From a Stoic perspective, virtue is the only good, and vice is the only evil. Every decision or action in life should be evaluated in terms of virtue or vice. Notice that this Stoic classification may leave some concepts ambiguous. For instance, how do we categorize wealth, power, or fame? Stoics classify all such concepts outside virtue and vice as indifferent. For example, wealth can contribute to virtue or vice depending on the context. All concepts outside virtue or vice are considered indifferent because they can belong to either category depending on their conditions, so no definitive classification can be made. Speaking of indifference, let's discuss the Stoic concept of being indifferent. To be indifferent means not to get carried away or overly concerned about something. In Stoicism, especially in the face of suffering, being indifferent is crucial. To understand this better, let's first examine Stoicism's view on optimism. Excessive optimism, often referred to as toxic optimism, is rejected by Stoicism. This philosophy suggests that we should consider pessimistic thoughts and acknowledges their usefulness. For instance, Marcus Aurelius practiced a technique called negative visualization. He would mentally prepare for the worst-case scenarios, such as encountering ignorant and rude people or losing his empire. His goal was to remain steadfast and not lose his composure or deviate from virtue and goodness, even if the worst scenarios occurred. This technique helps in tolerating hardships by mentally preparing for them, thus reducing their impact. Seneca also advised people worried about losing possessions to imagine the worst-case scenario and accept it, showing that they can endure any adversity. When examining Stoicism's stance on control and emotions, we see that Stoicism emphasizes distinguishing between what we can and cannot control. Epictetus discusses the idea of the invincible person, stating that we should not be anxious about things beyond our control, as anxiety cannot change them. Instead, we should focus on what we can control. Negative emotions, such as fear, jealousy, and anger, are considered undesirable in Stoicism. While some negative emotions might have had evolutionary benefits, Stoicism argues that they obscure reason, which is crucial for living in accordance with nature. On the other hand, positive emotions like love and happiness are viewed more leniently. Stoicism does not entirely reject them, but advises moderation. Intense positive emotions that transform into desire or passion should be avoided, as they also hinder rational thinking. Now, let's address Stoicism's view on fate and submission. Although Stoicism does not have a concept of an afterlife, it shares some similarities with religious fatalism. Stoicism suggests that one should accept fate and submit to nature. Practices like negative visualization and indifference reflect this acceptance. Epictetus likens life to a journey where one can control only their actions, not the outcomes, and should remain calm and not complain when faced with misfortune. Finally, let's discuss the influence of Stoicism on the modern world and its impact on psychology and psychotherapy. For instance, Stoicism has significantly influenced rational emotive behavior therapy, REBT, developed by Albert Ellis. Ellis was inspired by Epictetus's idea that distress comes from our interpretation of events rather than the events themselves. He focused on changing irrational beliefs to alleviate psychological distress. Another notable figure influenced by Stoicism is Viktor Frankl. Frankl, a psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, developed logotherapy, emphasizing finding meaning in life even amid suffering. Frankl's experiences during the Holocaust reflected Stoic principles of accepting fate and focusing on one's response to adversity. His approach, while similar to Stoicism in focusing on meaning and control, allows for a more personal interpretation of meaning in life. In summary, Stoicism, which began around 2,300 years ago, has shown its relevance by influencing modern therapeutic practices and aiding individuals in extreme circumstances, demonstrating its profound and enduring impact.